Ed Wray is one of the greatest British entrepreneurs of our time. He's also a very nice chap. He went to Tunbridge School, and then he went on to Oxford. After Oxford, his first job was with Shell, and after that he went on to JP Morgan, where he became vice president in the derivatives market. So by anybody's standards, he was doing pretty well on his resume. But it was nothing compared with what was about to come. In 1999, Ed went over to a drinks reception, and he met this guy called Andrew Black, and during their meeting, they exchanged this idea about a betting exchange, an online betting exchange, which basically took out the middleman so you could bet against each other. What's remarkable about this is that next morning, despite the fact they talked about it at the drinks reception, they still remembered the idea, which is one of the first rules to success. Secondly, they actually did something about it and they launched it. It's a great thing that they did. As some of you will remember, 1999 was at the peak of the dot-com boom. So anybody who'd launched anything was doing very, very well. You had 19-year-old blue-haired kids driving around with lots and lots of money. It was a crazy time. Ed and Andrew went to try and raise capital from the venture capitalists, and they raised absolutely squat, nothing, zip. All they got is slammed doors in their faces, which we'll talk about in a minute. But because of that, he didn't quit, didn't go and cry in the corner. They raised, and they did a very innovative funding round where he put some of his own money in. He got money from friends, family, and also some of the former traders that he knew. And it's a great job that he did. It was worth the struggle, because many of you know about Betfair, obviously, but just in terms of the size of Betfair today, Betfair does over 7 million transactions per day. Now, that arbitrary number, to put it into context, is bigger than the entire European stock markets combined. So, pretty big. In 2010, he floated the company on the London Stock Exchange for a £1.4 billion sum. If you do the maths, Ed still owns just about 11% of that company, a little bit more, so he's doing pretty well for himself. He's been involved in many ventures, including Funding Circle, which is revolutionizing the way that we all generate capital for our companies. And he's here with us tonight, and I'd like to ask you all to give a massive welcome and a round of applause to our special guest this evening, Ed Wray.
Can I go home now?
Yeah. Excellent. It is quite bright up here.
Can't see anyone out. That's good.
You can see the front row, so you can do whatever you want at the back. If we can just talk for a minute about the personality of great entrepreneurs. First of all, you have been very successful, as I mentioned in the introduction, both in a large corporation, but also in an entrepreneurial setting. And some people think they're very different animals, right? You can be suited to a large corporate, or you can be a little bit crazy entrepreneurial visionary in an entrepreneurial world. Can you be both? Can you be good at both, or are they very different?
I think you can definitely be good at both. I mean, I look back on my career at JP Morgan, and it was an enormous organisation, not as enormous as it is now. And it was difficult in one way to work out how you could influence that directly, which is why I ended up leaving. But it taught me a huge amount about professionalism. It was a fabulous place to work. It taught me to get things right and to do, if you're going to do a job, do it properly. Yeah. And a lot of those skills I took on, when I started Betfair. I think in both you have to be passionate, you have to be perseverant. If you're not either of those in a big organisation, you get lost very quickly, and if you're not either of those in a small organisation, when you're starting it yourself, you'll fail. And I always think about P's, passion, perseverance, professionalism, and then people. And probably the one area I would say that banking didn't really set me up for at all, and probably why I wasn't particularly good at it, was managing people.
Right, okay. But yeah, you later on became the CEO of Betfair for 4 years, 1999 to 2003, so presumably you managed quite a few people then.
Well, I did. I was the founder, one of the two founders, so yes, I was the CEO to start with. And if I'm honest, the people that we had in those early days were, I didn't go looking for specific skills. I went looking for sort of common sense, like-minded sort of attitude, people who are prepared to say, come on, let's do this. And it was pretty small business. I mean, when I handed over in 2003, it was probably, I don't know, 150, 200 people. Yeah. And I didn't really enjoy that kind of it, that part of it. It's very different going from managing in a small business to managing in a large business. Some people do it spectacularly well. You know, Charles Dunstan's a good example of someone who's done it very well. A lot of people don't make that transition. And you can still have a lot of the passion and the drive, but have somebody else do a lot of the key management stuff.
That's very true. Delegation, good old delegation. So being passionate is absolutely essential for any course that you're doing. If we look at you, people like Bisstone from Twitter, Mike Lynch from Autonomy, Zuckerberg from Facebook, do you think there's anything that they have in common in terms of the world-class entrepreneurs? Is there anything?
I don't think I should be in that group, by the way, but it's very nice of you.
£1 billion organisations not bad.
Well, I think they're all very passionate about what they do. It's an overuse, as I say, I overuse that word. They're very confident in their vision for their business, and I think, let's be clear, every entrepreneurial business you get knocked back 100 times. I once said to someone, you get knocked down 100 times, it's a case of whether you can get up 101 times. And you have to have that confidence. You have to have a little bit, I think, of a railroad mentality. It's not just self-belief, but it's also, as I say, it's that combination of railroad mentality and perseverance. And I think if you look at all those guys, they've struggled to begin with. Easy to look now and say it was all always plain sailing, but it won't have been at any stage. There were lots of setbacks.
And that railroad mentality that you said, I mean, that helped you, as I mentioned about the venture capital funding. You didn't quit, you just decided to do it anyway and work out how to do it. So tell us, first of all, just answer the question if you can about sort of why did these VCs say no to you and Andrew?
If I'm honest, I think they were exactly right to say no to us, because we were two guys who had clearly what we thought was a great idea, but we hadn't really thought about how we were going to implement it, how we were going to build it, anything like that. So first few conversations were, okay, what's the idea? That sounds very interesting. Now, how are you going to do it? And we probably started umming and ahhing, and it probably didn't inspire a lot of confidence. At the time as well, I mean, it's difficult to remember back. 1999, everyone was sort of, there were heady days. There was another company out there, Flutter, who had done a spectacularly good job at raising amount of money. And a lot of people we went to said, oh, we've already seen this model. It's what Flutter are doing. So, you're second to the table. So no, thank you. But I have to say, it was the best thing, I think, that ever happened, because it was the first, you learn one of those lessons early on, and it's a pretty big lesson when nobody's going to give you any money to get going, to then say, right, okay, how am I going to get around that problem? And we did it in a slightly sort of back to front way.
So a lot of entrepreneurs, I'd have thought, if they got knocked back down by the VCs, and sometimes people can look at VCs on a pedestal and thinking they're, the be-all and the end-all. If they're saying, no, the business won't work, did that knock your confidence at all? Or?
Of course it does. I mean, and you said I didn't go and cry in the corner. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. But yes, of course, you go in and say, why can't they see it the same way that we see it? And what are we missing? Because these are smart people. As I say, I think they look for the idea and the sort of the very clear path to developing it. But I think it made us a bit bloody-minded, and we said, well, fine, we'll go and show you. And they turn down a lot of people, and they should do, because an awful lot of people go and see them. And I've bumped into lots of people who said, oh, I had this, we had the betting exchange idea too, but we couldn't get any money for it, so we didn't go any further. And I go, well, thank goodness we didn't do that.
Just out of interest, Ed, have you met any of the people that turned you down and said, hi, must feel good?
And look, you don't... We all make lots of decisions that go wrong and lots of decisions that go right, and I don't believe at all ever in sort of sitting there and saying, ha-ha. I absolutely believe in saying, okay, what did we learn from, why did I say no, or why did I say yes, what did you learn from it? And I'm often quoted, I think, as saying that you've got to make lots of mistakes to get things right, because you learn a lot more from those mistakes. But they've always been very helpful. And I mean, actually, we then did have a whole load of venture capitalists who came in once we bought Flutter. So I had the opportunity to work with them, and a lot of them are very helpful.
So could you just tell us how you actually managed to raise the, I think, $2 million early on?
Yeah, we raised £1 million from friends and family, and having worked in the city, I realised that there are two really key dates in any banker's life, and the first of those is when they get told what their bonus is, and the second one is when they get paid it. And they are about a month apart in many cases. So I made sure I was going to see people between those 2 dates. So I knew that they knew what they were going to get, but they hadn't been given it yet, so they couldn't spend it. And then I also went to, I could probably have raised, we raised £1 million. I could probably have raised a lot of that from people at JP Morgan, but I actually went and I got one person on a trading floor in 10 different investment banks. Well, it was 10 then, but a lot of them have merged and a couple aren't around anymore, so it's not 10 anymore. But with a simple reason, I thought, well, if I get one evangelist on each trading floor, then they'll be able to sort of spread the word to, a couple of hundred people on their trading floor, and it was sort of, that kind of a network effectively to get it going. And we were lucky. EIS, which had just started then, was an absolute godsend for us. And so we raised £1 million from friends and family. The day the money arrived was without doubt the most stressful day of my life. And to this day remains that, because I suddenly sat there and thought, okay, these are all people I know. And I've now got their money and I better sort of make it work. And it's silly little things, like you go and have a drink with someone 3 weeks afterwards, and you're not quite sure whether they're happy to see you or whether they're going, well, why the bloody hell aren't you in the office, working hard for my money? And it was great. I mean, they were very good to back us. It got us going, and without doubt, the proudest and most rewarding day of my life was when we were able to hand money back to them and say thank you for your belief in us. Yeah.
Presumably, when you see them for drinks now, they're buying the champagne, I'm guessing.
Well, they've done all right out of it, and as I say, I'm delighted about that. But they took a big risk with it.
Big risk, yeah. So if you look at, you mentioned the word failure in there, and when I did some research on you over the last few weeks, one of the things you do seem to be really pushing is this whole notion of failure is good. And you told the Director magazine, you said we all need to have a bigger appetite for failure. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't say failure is good in itself, but you shouldn't be scared of failure. Yeah. If you're scared of failure, you won't push yourself, you won't find out, what you need to know. And I don't think I'm saying anything particularly controversial when I say you learn an awful lot more from when you get things wrong than when you get things right. Yeah. I absolutely believe that, it's easy to run a business when everything is going well. You really learn a lot about the quality of people running a business when things are going badly. So what I think we can't afford to do is to castigate people for failing. And I think in this country, we're so much better at it now than we used to be. Everyone says, oh, the Americans, they celebrate failure. They don't, but they celebrate what people learn out of it. And we are starting to do that. And it's so true, because if you don't get things wrong, you don't know. And when you get things wrong and then when you solve them, that is the most rewarding thing. And then you sort of think to yourself, well, the guys chasing behind have probably got to jump over that hurdle in some way too. Yeah. So it's more a case of saying don't be scared of it. If you're scared of it and you're worried about failing, you're not an entrepreneur.
Okay. So you once sent to the Telegraph when they were talking about why you do speak to entrepreneurs like you are doing this evening. You once said, quote, so much about entrepreneurship is about not being scared to give it a go. Therefore, as you hear somebody else talk about all the silly mistakes they made, it just empowers you and gives you confidence to say, maybe I can do this too. So, Ed, any particular big clangers or silly mistakes you can share?
Plenty. I mean, I think, so early days, I remember when we had just bought Flutter and we put these two businesses together. I'd spent quite a lot of money buying this business, relatively speaking, and yet I was umming and ahhing, or we were umming and ahhing about spending, a few £1,000s on a slightly bigger server. Yeah. These are the days when you had servers rather than the cloud. And we very nearly screwed it up because we put these businesses together and, we were doing 12, they were doing 3 in sort of round numbers, and you put it together and suddenly the combined business is doing 20. So there was a huge explosion of growth and we weren't ready for it. And yet we'd sort of said this might happen. And we were just a bit too timid, and we should have backed ourselves more there. Okay. We were playing catch up. I think I learned through that time is your most undervalued commodity. People talk about money, they talk about people. Time is a really, really crucial commodity, and so sometimes you have to do things in a overly inefficient, expensive way to sort of maximize time. I think the other thing, candidly, that we didn't do as we grew was recognize that everyone has a natural ceiling, ourselves included, and we probably weren't as good about sort of continuing to bring in the people that were going to take us to the next stage the whole time, when we should have been. Okay. I mean, they're sort of ongoing issues which you'll always face, I think. Yep. Hiring people, and I was not particularly, I think I wasn't particularly good at hiring people, and I was not particularly good at managing them. But one of the biggest things I learned out of Betfair is, if you hire 10 people, the chances are, you're going to get at least 10 or 20% of those hiring decisions wrong, and that means that there's 1 or 2 people in your organisation who shouldn't be there, minimum. And it's very difficult to get used to that. And again, now, you get that gut feeling when someone doesn't fit, and it's not because they're not a great person, it's just they don't fit in your organisation, and once you get that gut feeling, you need to act on it. Yeah,
and Richard Koch, who's the author of the 80-20 principle, believes that and also an investor, obviously, in Betfair with 6.5%, but his belief is that, in every 100 people, you're going to have 20 star performers, 20 rubbish, but you just have to let go of the rubbish people, well, not the rubbish people, but the people who don't fit, as you say.
Yeah, and there are 2 things. One, you will hire some people who just don't fit from day one, and you need to sort of recognise that. And sometimes it's hard, but it's a bit like, in the sporting analogy, a manager who goes and spends, tens of millions of pounds on a striker who doesn't then score goals. Do you sit there and say, I've got that wrong, I'm a Chelsea fan, so I know all about that. But sometimes you just got to say, look, that was a bad mistake, I've got to cut it. Yeah. The other one, and I think this is a harder one, is you are surrounded by people who are fabulous, who've done a brilliant job for you. But as the organisation grows and grows and grows, they reach their ceiling and they're not the right people to take it forward. That's a much harder one, because 6 months ago you were saying, these people are the best people, I couldn't have a better team. And now you're saying, actually, I'm beginning to think that maybe I've got to upgrade. And that's a tough realisation. Again, one that it took me a long time to get my head around.
How do you manage that if you've got a department head that was great at this stage of the business and then not so great? You just have to...
again, a much overused phrase, but great people will hire people who are better than them, and will bring, and they will sort of stretch themselves. Average people will hire people who are worse than them to make themselves look good. And I think that's absolutely spot on. So, you will have those conversations. People will have a certain, they'll reach their sort of natural limit. What tends to happen is that if you're not careful, as the organisation grows, so the job responsibilities for every individual in that organisation grow with it. And what you should do is say, okay, if this person is not up to it now, I've got to replace that person. But too often, and we did this the whole time, you bring in someone to help them and to work alongside, and then you tend to have 2, good but not brilliant people when you should have 1 brilliant person with all the associated complexity of a large organisation. What I also find is every time you speak to someone and have that conversation, it's never a surprise. So both people are sort of sensing that something's probably not working. But as I say, I wasn't very good at it.
That shows good management, transparency before the big conversation. Just quickly about Richard Koch as well, because he did say he's an investor in the business, as you know. But we interviewed him on LeadersIn, and he did say that what was interesting about the management team early on in Betfair is that there wasn't that much expertise in the betting industry, and it didn't end up mattering. But would you advise entrepreneurs that they can just launch into any industry without having a deep-rooted knowledge in that sector?
Well, we have. I mean, don't forget, Andrew, my co-founder, was a professional gambler, so he knew a thing or two about betting. He wasn't, entrenched in the industry per se. I think you can, as long as you know, as long as you recognise where you don't know and plug that. And you've got to be very careful not to believe your own hype the whole time. And we came out here. We had a great idea. The best thing that ever happened to us, well, one of the best things was when the existing competition very obviously rubbished our idea, and we could exploit that. And at that point, we knew we had something, because the more they tried to rubbish it, the more we thought we were hurting them. And we exploited that in a very simple way that, the bookmaking relationship with most bookmakers is quite adversarial. If you lose, the bookmaker wins, and vice versa. And so we exploited the whole "my enemy's enemy is my friend" issue. And suddenly people are saying, well, if the bookmakers don't like these guys, and we don't like the bookmakers, then we should probably like these guys, and we use that to our advantage. But there comes a point where you've got to have industry expertise, and you either build it up yourself or you have to bring it in.
You mentioned their competition, just very quickly, if we can touch on this, and then it's interesting, Flutter did launch at about the same time as you. They raised 44 million in VC finance. You managed to get around 2 million in angel through friends, but you absolutely annihilated them. I'm going to quote a guy called an algo from efreebets.com, which is a portal, and he said, at precisely midnight last Sunday, a small piece of cyberspace winked out of existence. They closed down the server, pulled the plug from the socket, and that was the end of Flutter.com. So how, despite the fact that they had so much VC, did you win? And what lessons can we learn about annihilating whoever our own competitors are?
So we executed better. So people used to say it's first mover. and I think it's first good mover. And one of the things that Andrew, to his credit, absolutely got was the key, liquidity and just making sure that the site did what it was meant to do, and it was very functional for. He understood what the punter was after. He was as I say, an ex-professional gambler. I used to bet a bit. A number of us used to bet a bit, and I think we had that domain. We had more of that domain expertise than they did. We were lucky. We got ahead early. We hit the right formula first, and once we were out there, then it's quite hard to sort of chip away. When we realised that they were, going to be able to copy and things, we then said, okay, well, let's put these businesses together. Yeah. And I'm very glad we did, because I think if we hadn't have done, we'd have spent an awful lot of time fighting them. Yeah. They were absolutely getting things right. What we then did, though, which I think was smart when we put them together, is we just were quite brutal about saying, right, we're going to shut one down and concentrate everything into the surviving entity. And that was, again, I think it's easy to say now, but it's quite difficult to at the time. But that was definitely a key ingredient of the success of that deal. And
you put their CEO as your CEO, is that right?
Well, we brought their CTO in. David came in as CTO and then eventually became CEO of Betfair. Yeah. If I'm honest, if I had my time again when we did that deal, I would have been much more pragmatic about taking more good people from there and letting some good people go from Betfair. I think it was you've got to understand, we had grown up for the previous year hating these guys with passion. Yeah. We had pictures on the wall that we didn't quite throw darts at, but they were sort of we were very focused on sort of this is who we've got to beat. And then suddenly you say, let's put the businesses together. That's quite difficult to do. Yeah. And we were probably too loyal to some of the Betfair people who, in retrospect, we should have said, there's a better person over there and we'll bring them in. Luckily with David, we did bring him in.
That gladiatorial spirit of annihilating competitors is not a bad energy, is it?
No, if it's channeled properly. Okay. So, being aware of your competition is very important. But you don't want to get into being sort of vitriolic and sort of just saying I want to go after them for the sake of going after them.
We've got about another 10 minutes and we're going to open it up to the floor. So first of all, some entrepreneurs want to run companies that are lifestyle businesses and they just want to generate some cash for themselves and just not have a boss probably. Mm-hmm. Others want to build the next Twitter, Google. So let's assume for a second, looking at the next camp, if you want to build a £1 billion company, what are some of the top 2 or 3 things you've got to have?
Got to have a lot of luck. I've gone through the passion, perseverance, professionalism, hire good people. I think today there's a huge advantage that you can test things and you can learn things really quickly. Believe what you read. Don't if you put all your energy into one decision and it doesn't work out or it doesn't do what you expected, then believe that rather than sort of convince yourself that somehow the data and everything else is wrong. And my key mantra in all of this is find a reason to say yes, not a reason to say no. Yeah. And too often, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you can find more and more reasons why you want to not do something. Make decisions. If they're the wrong decisions, then go back and change them. But a wrong decision is better than no decision.
Yeah, exactly. Because it builds momentum going forward.
Because actually, by being prepared to make some wrong ones, you'll also make a lot of good ones, and you'll move forward. If you once get into the habit where you don't make decisions, everything slows down, you have a meeting, you come out, you say, oh, okay, that's interesting, let's come back to that next week. Yeah. What's the point of the meeting if you're going to come back next week, have the meeting next week, and etc. And it just slows down. As I say, time, if you look at all of these great businesses, just look at how incredibly efficient they've been about just releasing things, killing them when they don't work. Google didn't start out making any money from search. It's sort of, it was a search business, but hadn't worked out how it was going to make money. The whole sort of, it worked out that I'm going to sort of do pay-per-click, and then I'm going to buy this in. You look at eBay, completely changed its business model. Facebook changed its business model quite significantly. So none of these guys sort of just said, this is how I'm going to do it, and stayed there. They were continually evolving their business and doing so in real time.
Because we interviewed Sir Stuart Rose, obviously former M&S, and we talked about earlier now, Chairman of Ocado, and he said that one thing. He said, the key thing you've got to do is make sure your business is moving forward. It's like a bicycle. If it's not going forward, it falls over. Talking about the testing that you just mentioned there, how important is it for entrepreneurs or for any size of business just to get stuff out into the marketplace? I know that Facebook, for example, they've got posters all around the place saying better done than perfect. In other words,
I think it's huge. And again, I think today we've got so much more advantage. You can user groups. There's one user group that counts, and that's the user group out there. Yeah. So put stuff out there, see what comes back, and then just adjust accordingly. Yeah. bear in mind that you never quite, however much you think you know, if you're trying to, if you're going to develop one product to 100%, that's what you think is 100%. Well, do you really know that, or do you want your users to tell you that? And actually, 80-20 rule comes in. You can probably do 5 products to 80%. Yeah. Stick them out there. Say, okay, that one's clearly they love, and we couldn't invest in this one's an absolute dog. Yeah. So I'm going to leave that one. Now, if that was the one that you had chosen to begin with, you've spent all your money on that one, all your time on that one. You've launched something that's fallen flat in its face. So getting things out there, in a rough and ready state. Don't miss deadlines. Just get your users to help. I mean, it's a very tech orientated comment, obviously, but they are your biggest and most valuable resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no excuse in this. It's quite easy and cheap to put things out into the marketplace.
It costs you absolutely nothing. And you've got so many platform tools there to do it that you can get feedback. You launch something, you can get feedback on it pretty much in real time. Yeah. We would launch a product and we would know within 24 hours whether we got it right or wrong. The challenge then was when we got it wrong was convincing people, okay, we got it wrong, now we've got to change it.
The other thing, obviously, that you've done it very, very well is you've ridden technological trends, and so seeing trends in the market, horizon, all the big companies are riding big trends. So what do you see, Ed, as some of the big, we've had social media, we've had mobile, well, we haven't had it, but we're in the process of the mobile revolution, if you like. What do you think are some of the next things on the horizon that are going to be super cool that we're going to be talking about?
I think disintermediation continues. I think if you go right back, I often say go back thousands of years to look at how you would want to do something thousands of years ago, and often we've put in place these very inefficient structures. So banking is one, betting is another. We suddenly invented these ideas. I mean, why do you need a bank other than to sort of facilitate people handing money to each other and then keeping it safe? Well, you could argue that actually now technology allows us to facilitate putting money together directly, and you can keep it safe in different ways. I'm not sure the banks necessarily keep it safe anyway. So all the time, it's actually, if you go right back to first principles and design something, if you wouldn't design it the way it is today, then that market is absolutely ripe for innovation. Right. So you see that with social networking. It's just, well, we all like to keep in contact, and it's a way of doing it, and technology allows us to do it. So I think finance, clearly anything where you have a virtual commodity, and finance is effectively a virtual commodity, allows you to do that. I think insurance is absolutely ripe for, for disintermediation and therefore innovation. I think you will, mobile has still got a long way to go. I think location has got a huge amount of, way to go. Yeah. New generation today are totally comfortable giving up pretty much all their information about what they're doing when. Yeah. The other one I think to look out for is where you take online technology and apply it in the offline world. So, we've spent a lot of time over the last 15 years looking about what you can do online and the ability, how you can get to know your customer. And there'll be some, there are some very smart businesses now that are turning that back the other way and saying, well, actually, offline is still a much bigger part of our world, and let's use some of those techniques there. So, for example, you've all got your mobile phones on. Your phone is the whole time looking for a network. It's the whole time looking for a Wi-Fi network. Yeah. So there's a clever business out there right now that puts little boxes in retail shops, so it actually knows when your phone walks in, how long you're in the store for. It doesn't know it's you, but that's actually quite easy to do later on. But it knows you were here last Thursday for 2 hours. It knows you're here now. So those kind of things that you're going to get a lot more, the two coming together.
Yeah, online, offline integration, the good old real world. Are you going to do all of these yourself, I'm presuming?
Not all of those.
But if we just talk about obviously crowdfunding, and the one thing you have been involved in very recently is Funding Circle, which has raised over £150 million, obviously for companies in the UK. Best week last week, so congratulations on that, sir. Can you just tell us a little bit about Funding Circle?
So Funding Circle is what is loosely called they loosely call it a peer-to-peer finance, but it's really crowdfunding for SMEs. So SMEs traditionally would go to their bank manager and say, I need to borrow £50,000 up to £1 million, whatever it is, for working capital, to buy a piece of equipment or whatever. As we all know, banks aren't really lending. Yeah. Why do we need a bank there? We don't really. So actually, we go to all of us, the crowd, and we lend directly to the business. And it runs a simple auction. And I think the key question, if I asked anyone in this room, do you have a bank account? Everyone would put their hand up and say, yes, I do. If I said, have any of you lent to businesses? A few of you might have lent through Funding Circle or something like that, but most of you probably wouldn't put your hand up. And I would argue every single one of you should put your hand up, because your money right now is going to businesses through banks, or has been, but you have no control over that. So all we've done is take out a very inefficient middleman and allow people to talk directly to businesses. So, it's obviously a great time because banks have struggled, and I'm not knocking the banks the whole time. They've got lots of challenges they've got to fix, but businesses are desperate for this kind of cash. The key is it takes 5 months on average for a small business to raise money from a bank.
Yeah.
It takes anything from 3 hours to a week for them to do it on Funding Circle. So it's a much better and much more efficient process. And it will never replace banks, but it will absolutely establish itself as as another means of businesses raising money.
And this is just about the British government and the lack. I know this is a passionate area for you, and you told the Telegraph back in 2010, one of my passions is how we foster entrepreneurship in this country. Right now, we're not doing a very good job. We could do better. And this is obviously when we had Darling and Brown involved. Are we doing a better job now? First question. And the second part of that is, do you think this country has a sort of because we're beating up the bankers so much, or sometimes even those that are high net worth individuals, do you think we've got a problem deep-rooted in the psyche with success?
So I think we're doing a much better job now. We've made raising things like EIS and then CDIS, which are fabulous mechanisms for raising money for small businesses to do it. We have removed a lot of the red tape. There are still plenty more that we could remove. So I think it's a whole load more entrepreneur-friendly than it was. I still think we are, we sort of say we want all these people to create all these amazing businesses, but I think we probably are still slightly shy of what we're going to do when we have a few of those people wandering around doing it. We absolutely have the kernels of some fabulous ideas here and some brilliant businesses. What we've not done well enough yet is take them into the sort of, the mega stage of a Google, Facebook or whatever. I think we are getting better at it. I think the concern I had coming out of 7, 8 was that people were going to confuse excess with success, and we should be absolutely encouraging people to be successful and to create, wealth. If they create wealth for themselves, they're going to create wealth for the economy as a whole, and that's really important. And when they do that, we should not then suddenly turn around and make them evil because they've been successful doing it.
Yeah.
But I think we are so much better than we were doing this 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, we're definitely going in the right direction. And I think within Europe, we absolutely have the most exciting stuff happening here than any of the other European
So long-term prospect for us being here in the UK with China, India, new disruptors out there in the marketplace is bullish?
Yeah, because I think we've got some incredibly smart people. I mean, we've got a fabulous university system here, and there's a lot of incredibly good ideas that come out of our universities that I don't think we are commercialising as well as we could. And I think that's where we've got a huge well that we can tap into. Plus, I think, as I say, 5 years ago people didn't want to become entrepreneurs, or 10 years ago they didn't want to become entrepreneurs. Now it's the most, pretty much the most popular career decision there is, I think.
Yeah. You think that's because of Dragon's Den and The Apprentice and things
No,
like
I don't
that?
actually. I think they're all. Don't get me going on them. They're good on the one hand, they're awful on the other because they create a completely unrealistic, sense of what it's like running a business. The whole, you're fired thing is, it makes for great TV.
Yeah.
It doesn't make for running great businesses.
So now we're going to do some questions. So we've got 2 people with microphones, I believe. Okay, is there any questions?
Thank you. Tim Whiting from Little Brown Publishers. Technology has obviously been a great facilitator of entrepreneurship. In your own case, do you think that had there not been a kind of a new wave of technology that allowed you to change an industry, you would have done something similar? I mean, were you kind of ready-made to make that kind of jump anyway?
I don't know. I mean, I'd been doing investment banking for 8 years and was a bit bored of it. So I actually took a sabbatical and went to see my boss and said I want to take 6 months off. And while I was on that 6 months, then I started sort of work on this. I always felt that I wanted to know. I mean, again, it's that sort of fear of failure thing. If I'd have done it and failed, I'd have said, okay, I'm not cut out to do that. And I might have decided to go and do it again, but at some stage I'd have said, okay, I don't want to do it. But at least then I'd have answered that question. So I think I would have wanted to do something. I'm not sure what it would have been. I've always been sports mad. I've always been a bit of a geek. I read engineering at university, and so from those point of view, it was an obvious, business to sort of get involved in. And I think one of the things that really interested me at the time is that one person said to me, when you're looking at these ideas, if it's an internet business, and I think it's still true today actually, had the idea appealed 100 years ago, but you couldn't do it 100 years ago because you didn't have this thing, and now the internet's enabled you to connect together and it works, those are going to be the great internet businesses. And I think that's true. If you look at all the ones that have been successful, they absolutely have to have the internet at their heart. Without it, they don't work, and that's why they've been successful. So, that's what got me excited by it.
The gentleman just back here.
Hi, Jonathan Sim from Amazon. Quick question about disruption. Could you tell us more about disruptive business models as well as how that's influenced your business?
I love the idea that someone from Amazon asked me that question. But to me, a disruptive business model is just a natural evolution. And the best, the great thing about a disruptive business model, you look at it once it's being created, and everyone goes, it's blindingly obvious. And I go back to that idea about why sometimes we do things today the way we do them because we did them that way yesterday. And the great disruptors are the people who suddenly say, well, actually, just because we did it yesterday doesn't mean to say it's the right way to do it today. I think the key is that that trend will never change. One of the things I used to say to everyone at Betfair was, if we can go up one side of the mountain, this fast and disrupt and basically steal everyone's lunch, then we can sure as hell come down the other side twice as fast as everybody steals our lunch. And so you just by definition, we don't know where the next one's going to come from, but you've got to be alive to it, and you've got to think about how people can shift to it. I think, as I say, to me, the best business ideas come out of when you're going about your everyday life and you come across something, you say, that just irritates me why I do it that way. It's not about sitting there in a dark room trying to have that light bulb moment. It's actually going, this is just not working as well as it should do, and then getting off your backside and saying, so I'm going to change it and do it. And sometimes disruption is a massive step. More often, it's actually lots of incremental steps, and then suddenly you go, gosh, we've completely changed the way things work.
I'm Ruby from Wired magazine. Quick question. We constantly engage with entrepreneurs and startups in the magazine, looking at how they've become successful, and a lot of the themes that you've talked about, i.e. failure and having to keep going, come up all the time. But at the moment, I'm focusing on a project with young entrepreneurs, so aged between 12 to 18, and there's a surprisingly large number of them out there who are doing incredible things. And I just wondered, from your point of view, if you had one piece of advice to give them as they're growing and as they're kind of moving into a new space, what would that be?
They're so lucky because they haven't really thought about what might go wrong, which is actually fantastic, and that's just incredibly, liberating for them. So I would just say, if you think you want to do it, do it. Try it. If it fails, so what? There's no shame in failing whatsoever. And I think it's just giving people the courage to go, this is what I want to try and do. I'm going to try and do it. And seek out lots of, don't be afraid to ask other people what they did. Don't be afraid to, use what other people have done. There's no point in reinventing the wheel every single time. And there's no shame in looking at what people do well and saying, I'll take a bit of that and a bit of that, and then putting it together with what you've come out with. But most of all, it's just go for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. Ed, as you can imagine, gets invited to do a lot of things. We were absolutely delighted, obviously, when he said yes to doing this, and he's been absolutely phenomenal with his time, sharing some great insights. And so if you can all join me in just saying thank you to Ed, thank you very much indeed.